Okay, well, shortly after this, we went to a few more conventions, and the Kellys discerned that I had always wanted to work in Hollywood as a writer or as an assistant to a writer or something, so they started to encourage me to come down. By now, they knew me well enough to know that I was not a threat. If I was a stalker, they decided they'd let me catch them, you know? And they began to encourage me to move to Hollywood. Dee put in a good word for me at Paramount, and a recruiter there called me, and I went down for a series of pre-employment tests and passed them. So I ended up working in Hollywood for like 14 years. Not at Paramount, strangely enough, at Warner Brothers Studios for about 14 years. Up until this time, now this is like, I'm getting to know the Kellys really, really pretty well. But up until this time, my mom and dad had never met the Kellys. And they were nervous that I, a single woman, and a naive one at that, was pulling up stakes and moving to Hollywood, which they pretty much considered the most decadent place on the planet. They were afraid that I would fall in with the wrong crowd, and they truly wondered if the Kellys had me in thrall and might be up to no good with their daughter. Nothing could have been farther from the truth, but they had no direct knowledge of the Kellys, and their minds were in mother hen mode. This is so funny to me because it was in Hollywood that I became a born-again Christian. That was a much bigger shock to them than falling in with the wrong crowd would have been. One Thanksgiving when Mom and Dad were down for a visit, and Dee and Carolyn, I invited Dee and Carolyn to come to Thanksgiving dinner, and they said they couldn't, but that they would like to come by for about an hour and meet my mom and dad. Oh boy. When I told Mom and Dad this, they looked like a deer caught in headlights. And they dressed up a whole lot more than they normally did. I said, that was not necessary, it was okay. And he said, well, we've got to dress up for these gods who are visiting with us today. I had been extolling the Kellys' virtues for so long that they thought I was like way over the edge regarding this mythical couple. But then after they met him, Dad apologized to me. He said, oh, you were so absolutely right on about those people. And Chris, you're not crazy. I said, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, gang. A couple years after this, my mother was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. I'll never get through this unless I read this part, but it's crucial that you learn this about DeForest Kelley. So I'm going to read it, and please bear with me. On March 22nd, 1997, Carolyn called to let us know that she and Dee would like to drive over to my place the following Saturday and visit with my folks and me, if that's all right. I said, it certainly is, and she giggled. I gave her careful directions as they had only been to my new condo once before. She said, be sure your new kittens are on their best behavior and that they're looking good. I said, I can guarantee they'll look good, Carolyn, they always do. But best behavior? They're only 8 months old. They don't have a best behavior unless they're asleep. She laughed and said, they'll be fine. The Kellys visited with us for an hour and a half. Mom was wearing a turban on her head to hide the fact that her hair had grown back in mismatched colors and textures. The hair was still patchy in spots. Instead of the silvery mane she had once enjoyed and been complimented on endless times, she felt she looked like someone who would make babies cry in the supermarket. Despite the fact that the turban was warm and itchy, she insisted on wearing it when company was around or when she went out in public. The wig she had bought had long since been cast aside as too hot, too scratchy, and too artificial looking. I was happy to see how good Dee and Carolyn both looked. The regimen of walking 6 blocks daily had given them a look of such robust health that they both appeared radiant. Dee had gained weight, too. The Kellys and Mom and Dad discussed their various health challenges. Carolyn bragged on Dee for having quit smoking. She said, we're both real Puritans now. Mom mentioned having developed a sweet tooth following chemotherapy. I never had one before. Carolyn said, I've developed a sweet tooth for that bittersweet chocolate Dee always gets. Dee leaned over to me and said, now you know where it goes. Dee told Dad that he was finished with acting. Dad told Dee You're a hell of an actor. I never knew how good until I met you. I thought you'd be a real son of a bitch after seeing those westerns you did. Then he added, nothing against Star Trek, but you could hardly get a word in with Shatner hogging all the time. Dee threw his head back and laughed at that and then clarified for Dad. In the 4th and 5th years, we were supposed to get our due. Each of our characters was supposed to have episodes spotlighting them, but the 4th and 5th years never came to pass. They met the kiddies. As luck would have it, both of the little rascals had worn themselves out just prior to the Kellys' arrival, so Ashley, the shy one, actually slept on Carolyn's lap while she stroked his long silky fur and cooed to him. Dee and Carolyn mentioned how wonderful Mom looked. She said, well, thank you. Then she said, I miss my hair. Carolyn said, don't worry, it'll be back, better than ever, maybe even curly. That's when Mom began her personal contribution to the visit. I don't normally do this except around family. It's pretty frightening to the uninitiated, but I feel comfortable with you. Let me show you how my hair is coming in. Then you'll know why I wear this turban. Slowly, painfully slowly, I thought, she pulled the turban from the top of her head, revealing the multiple colors of her hair and the remaining bare patches. I knew how much courage that took. I held my breath, knowing it might be a difficult moment for the Kellys, as sensitive as they were. Dee stood up at that moment and adopted a McCoy-like stance and authority, but he was still genuinely and authentically Dee. It wasn't false at all. He walked over to where she was and said, yes, let's get a good look at you. It's time for your physical. Mom stood up. He embraced her and held her for a long moment. Then he gently pushed her out to arm's length, gave her the once-over, head to toe, and proclaimed, you are a beautiful woman, Dorothea, and you're going to be just fine. I never loved DeForest Kelley more than I did at that moment. Mom melted, hugged him again, and responded gratefully, I know I'm going to be fine. I wish all you people would stop worrying about me. Then she joked, I'm going to outlive all of you. Mom left the turban off a lot more often after that visit. DeForest Kelley had told her she was beautiful and that she was going to be fine, and that was the only prognosis she was prepared to believe. Okay, 8 months later, I got a devastating phone call from A.C. Lyles at Paramount telling me that Dee was in an intensive care unit in an Encino hospital, terminally ill with cancer. I pretty much went into shock. He wanted me to send Dee's biography to him so that the news media would be able to do their thing when it actually all happened. But Dee was wondering if I could come in and take care of the house and stuff like that, because Carolyn had fallen a year earlier and broken her leg, and she was in another hospital. So they didn't have any children. They didn't have anybody else who could do this. So Dee had AC call me and see if I could lend a hand. And so I spent the last 3 months of Dee's life basically at his bedside. I took him out to doctor visits. When you're in the hospital, you can actually go to the doctor. Did you know that? But doctor visit, lawyer visits, wills, estates, took care of the house and stuff like that. So I'm not going to go a lot farther than that today. I think we want to end on a happier note than this. But I just wanted, you can pick up the book. The final days are in the book. I wrote the final days specifically so you would know what happened, because an awful lot of people, fans, always ask me, did he suffer? That kind of stuff, and I wanted you to know that he spent his final days in relative comfort. He had his wonderful sense of humor fully intact, and I think the only thing he really regretted, oh my gosh, he still talked about, oh, I think I should do another Star Trek convention. And if I'm feeling well enough, we have to do this one that's coming up in June. And of course, he didn't make it past the middle of June. But and when Bill Shatner came in, he said, Bill, I think I have 2 more ideas for original generation Star Trek movies. I mean, he was just living his life until he couldn't anymore. So, oh, when he passed away, there was a yellowing piece of paper in his